Hey everyone, and welcome to Refinery Life Church Australia. I'm Pastor Gary Hoban, and I thought it might be a good idea to re-record Saturday's message as our video gear overheated and just stopped working. So we're starting a series on getting to know the 12 apostles, and we started with Andrew. The scriptures that we used were mostly from John 1:35 to 42. It was about Jesus' public ministry and the first converts. It says, "Again the next day John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked along and said, 'Look, the Lamb of God.' The two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and saw them following him, and he asked them, 'What do you want?' And they answered him, 'Rabbi,' which we know translates to teacher, 'where are you staying?' And he said to them, 'Come and you will see.' So they went with him, and they saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him, because it was around the 10th hour. One of the two heard that what John had said, as a result followed Jesus, was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first looked for and found his own brother Simon and told him, 'We have found the Messiah,' which, as we know, is translated through to the Christ. Andrew brought Simon to Jesus, and Jesus looked at him and said, 'You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas,' which is translated to Peter." So we don't know much about Andrew very well. We just don't know him. His brother Peter gets most of the attention, but we ought to know him better. We see a Peter only occasionally in a lifetime, but we see Andrews every day. Andrews are the shop owners, the mechanics, the farmers, the police, the firefighters, and normal people like us. Every church, every school, and every organisation has leaders, but behind the scenes are those who do much of the work and really don't get any credit for it. Andrew was an ordinary man. We are told in John 1:44 that Andrew lived in Bethsaida of Galilee, where he made a living fishing. And he was mending nets when Jesus called in Mark 1:16 to 18. Andrew had heard the preaching of John the Baptist, so he and John went to see him. As John pointed to Jesus saying, "Behold the Lamb of God," Andrew followed him. It is a great hour of any person's life when they come to Christ. For salvation is the greatest discovery, and in Jesus' time it was no different. In the early church, Andrew was frequently called Procleticus, which literally means first called. Andrew was just an ordinary guy, but think of what he did for his Lord. He brought a member of his own family to Christ. Andrew was first pictured in the New Testament in the words, in verse 41, it says, "He first looked for and found his own brother, Simon, and told him, 'We have found the Messiah,' which, as we know, is translated to Christ." It's John 1:41. He looked for Simon, and I like to think that maybe Simon Peter was out in the lake somewhere, in his boat, fishing, and Andrew, having made that great discovery, could not wait to share the good news with his brother. Great emotion must have swept over his soul. He could not keep it to himself. Andrew cupped his hands over his mouth and he called, "Simon, we have found the Messiah." Andrew brought Peter to Jesus. What a brother Peter was. He'd become the most important to the apostles, a towering personality and a natural-born leader. But think of this. There would have been no bold Peter at Pentecost had there been no humble Andrew in Bethsaida. It's often harder for us to talk to our own families. It takes more courage to talk to our own families about Christ than it does to a complete stranger, even a complete stranger in a foreign country. Think about that. The accusing finger, the cynical laugh. "You're telling me about Jesus," Peter might have said to Andrew. "Remember that time when you become so angry and were swearing like a sailor? Remember Saturday when you drank too much and you were smashed? Remember that person you've got a grudge against? And you are telling me about Christ? But Peter couldn't say any of that because Andrew led an exemplary life. You cannot be an influence for Christ if your life is not fit. Andrew probably never preached a sermon, but I believe that we could say he lived a better sermon than most preachers will ever preach. Andrew never wrote an epistle, but he was a living epistle, known and read of men. Andrew never performed a miracle, but his life was a miracle of God. We need more Andrews who live their faith each day and are concerned for members of their own family. Andrew brought a small boy to Christ. The second picture we see of him, he's down by the shore. Multitudes of people had been following Christ. People simply forgot the time as they listened to him. And as he was speaking, it was now too late in the afternoon, and the people were still hanging on every single word that Christ spoke. The babies and children started to get restless because they were tired, they were hungry, and the nearest place to get food was about 3 to 4 hours away. Jesus couldn't let them go under the circumstances because the children would suffer, and some of the others would faint by the wayside. Jesus asked about food, and it was Andrew that answered him. And he said, "There is a little boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people?" It's in John 6:9. Now the most important one in the crowd was the boy. He had the food. But it was Andrew that brought him. Had there been no Andrew, there would have been no boy with lunch. Do we recognise the importance of leading and developing people for Christ? Especially the younger generations. People get all excited when an old man or old woman come to Christ, but often no one pays attention to the young child who does exactly the same thing. We have to set a good example if we expect people to trust us. The boy had confidence in Andrew. Most people you can't fool. They know whether your Christianity is real or not. When people believe in a person, it's usually a pretty good test of that person's character. What are we doing to lead people to Christ? What are we going to teach them? Where do you lead them on a Sunday? Or in our case, a Saturday afternoon? Andrew was the ordinary man behind the scenes. Behind every good minister, there's an unknown layman, or an unknown preacher, or a humble Sunday school teacher. Who can estimate the power of an ordinary person dedicated to God's service? Andrew brought members of other races to Jesus. The Bible tells us that some Greeks came to the Feast of the Feast of Passover. Everywhere they'd heard the wonderful reports about Jesus of Nazareth and wanted to meet him. These worshippers sought help from Philip. They said, "Sir, we would like to see Jesus, Philip." And Philip introduced that ordinary guy, Andrew, and together they brought the Greeks to Jesus. Philip did not take them to Peter. He might have said, "You idiot, you know that Jesus just came for the children of Israel." But he brought them to Andrew, and Andrew brought them to Jesus. Jesus was stirred with joy as he saw the Greeks coming. He saw a vision of the future when all races would come to him. He saw Peter at Pentecost, Paul at Antioch, Philip witnessing to a man in Ethiopia. He saw modern day preachers in Africa, evangelists in China, and missionaries all over the world. And he said, "And I, if and when I am lifted from the earth on the cross, will draw all the people to myself, Gentiles as well as Jews." Tells us that in John 12:32. Each time we see Andrew in the New Testament, he's introducing someone to Jesus. This is why we need more Andrews. We need more people that are going to lead people to Christ and then get them into a Bible-believing church. Andrew was just an ordinary man with extraordinary qualities. Now, he was great in humility. He didn't care who got the credit as long as the work was done. Can you think of any sour saints who become cynical and grumpy because someone else got the credit? They bitterly resent the fact that someone else got to lead. Playing second is often the most difficult position to play in life. But we need more Andrews. Andrew was massively overshadowed by his brother, but never did he show any hint of jealousy or antagonism. This is a quality of a great person. Andrew was only concerned with service and was a selfless soul. Andrew was great with personal friendships. He had a genius for reaching out to others. And people are brought to Christ on the vehicle of friendship. Andrew was filled with missionary zeal. He kept pointing people to Christ. This kind of evangelism, friend to friend, person to person, is the ultimate source of strength and growth for the church. So as we finish up, let's look at how he died. Now, tradition has it that Andrew took the gospel to Russia, Greece, Asia Minor, and Turkey. He lived to an old age, and he died a martyr's death. But he died telling others about Christ. According to tradition, it was in Greece, in the town of Patras, that Andrew met his martyr's death. When Andrew came into the town, Maximilia, the governor's wife, was at the point of death herself. Because of Andrew's ministry to the family, in this time of crisis, the governor's wife and brother became Christians, but the governor remained hostile to the Christian faith. The governor was so enraged by the conversions of his wife and his brother that he arrested Andrew, and later Andrew was condemned to death. To prolong his agony, he was not nailed, but only bound to the cross, to die of hunger, thirst, and exposure. And when faced with the cross, Andrew prayed, and part of his prayer was, "Hail, precious cross, thou hast been consecrated by the body of my Lord. I have ardently loved thee. Receive me into thy arms, and present me to my master, that he who redeems me on thee may receive me by thee." An ordinary life was extraordinarily powerful when lived in the spirit of the cross. And there's no reason that our ordinary lives can't be extraordinarily powerful, just like Andrew's. I hope you can join us next week as we start to talk about Andrew's brother Peter and some of the fantastic things that he did. Stay in the blessing.